रिकॉर्डिंग स्टार्ट हो रही है। मैं फोन अपना साइलेंट कर लेता हूँ। हाँ साइलेंट में ठीक है।
रेडी टू गो 1 2 3 स्टार्ट. Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis by SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles which feature in the Hindu newspaper and break them down for our understanding from the UPSC examination point of view. So let's start our today's discussion by taking the important articles which are featuring in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper. So let's start with our first article of the day. The first article which appears in the newspaper reads, about 41.5 crore Indians out of multidimensional poverty since 2005-2006. Now this is a significant article which appears in the newspaper because this talks about the multidimensional poverty index. Now this index in itself is an important measuring tool to measure poverty. So from the examination point of view, this becomes important for us to study from the GS2 perspective as well as GS3 perspective, wherein we study different aspects of poverty. So through this article, we'll analyze what exactly is the multidimensional poverty index, how is it measuring the poverty, and through it, we'll understand how India is faring on reducing its poverty. So before we begin on discussing the multidimensional poverty index, let's first try to ask this question: what exactly is poverty? When we talk about poverty, what exactly do we mean by it? Is poverty only not having the means to sustain ourselves through food or not able to satiate our hunger and other needs? Is that the only aspect of poverty, or is poverty something else as well? Is not able to educate yourself, which is also called learning poverty, is that also a part of poverty? Is not able to afford the requisite freedom to do what you want, is that also a part of poverty? So when we talk about poverty, it actually means a lot of things. It means the person is not able to do what he or she wishes to do or wishes to achieve, and there aren't enough opportunities or the basic fundamentals which the human needs to fulfill those needs. Those basic fundamentals are not available to the human, and this state is actually known as poverty. And recognizing this, the multidimensional poverty index actually recognizes this fact that poverty is not just sustenance through fundamental means. It is a very large concept and a very complicated concept. That is why it brought out a tool to measure poverty in a multidimensional manner, hence the name Multidimensional Poverty Index. This was launched by the United Nations Development Programme, which we shortly called UNDP, and the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, or OPHI. This was launched in 2010. This is based on the idea that poverty is not unidimensional, as we just discussed, not just depends on income, and one individual may lack several basic needs like education, health, and other things. So therefore, rather it is multidimensional. So this multidimensional nature of the poverty is actually encompassed in the index, which shows the proportion of poor people and the average number of deprivations each poor person experiences at the same time. So it tries to measure the poverty of citizens and residents residing across the globe in basically measuring their poverty in 3 dimensions. One is education, other is health, and the next is standard of living. So when we talk about these parameters, we can take a logical look and understand as to how all these parameters would decide on the multidimensional nature of poverty for the individual. So this means that the 3 main parameters are: one is health, another is education, and third is the standard of living of the person. So on the health parameter, this has been given 1/3 of the weightage in the index. So under it, what is the nutrition level of the family? That is being measured. Second is the child mortality rate is taken into account to take the case of how the health is faring in the residents. Second parameter is about education. Now, how to measure education as a parameter to decide whether or not the person is poor or is able to afford the education or not. So that is measured first of all in the years of schooling, years of schooling, and second, it is measured in school attendance. So these two parameters can give a picture as to is the person or is the young kid able to carry on with the school for a longer time, and second, is he able to attend the school for a long period of days, or is he or she required to leave the school in between. So these become the parameters for measuring education. And third is standard of living. In this particular aspect, what is measured are the fundamental means which is required to live a dignified life in society. Are they being available to the human beings or not? So what are they? The cooking fuel, is it available? Are the hygiene conditions in which they are living, is the sanitation good? Is drinking water available to the citizens? Is electricity supply in adequate supply to them? Is housing facility available to them? And is assets, what assets they are holding? So these are the sub parameters which make up the broader parameter of standard of living, and in these three parameters actually the multidimensional poverty index is measured. So with the parameters we can see that this is quite a holistic index which, when measured on all these parameters, will give us a clearer picture on how the individuals are performing in their lives. So now let's discuss on how this particular index is then interpreted. So in these three parameters, the person multidimensionally is poor if he or she is deprived in 1/3 or more of the weighted indicator. So on these three parameters, the score which is taken, if the score is coming less than 33% for the person, that would mean that he or she is multidimensionally poor. And if it is even more than that, then it would lead to extreme multidimensional poverty. This is a significant index because it recognizes poverty from different dimensions compared to the conventional methodology that measures poverty only from the income or monetary terms. So this is the multidimensional poverty index. Now, how has India fared in it? So the 2022, in the month of October, the UNDP and the other organization releases the multidimensional poverty index. And this year, the good news for India is that it has given a report that India has managed to actually reduce its poverty from the year 2005-2006, and close to 41.5 crore Indians have been taken out from poverty from these particular time, that is the time period of 2005 to 2006. So till now, the incidence of poverty according to the index has reduced. So the incidence of poverty fell from 55.1% in the 2005-2006 time period to 16.4% in the 2019 to 2021 in the country, which would mean that if 55% of the people were poor in India in the year 2005-2006, now 16.4% people are poor. So this shows that in terms of reducing poverty in India, there has been a success that is being witnessed, and this has resulted into lessening the poverty of the South Asian region as a whole, which now stands as the second most poorest region, because the first one is Sub-Saharan Africa, which has 57.9 crore people, and as compared to it, South Asia has 38.5 crore. So it has lessened the poverty ratio in the South Asian region as well. And then but the catch with respect to this index is that where we are wanting to measure the reduction in poverty, and we are also seeing one can say a positive trend, but the catch over here is that 70% of the data that is being taken from by these indexes to calculate the poverty has been taken from the National Family Health Survey data, but this data was taken before the pandemic. And we all know what kind of effects the pandemic have caused onto the lives of poor, where the incidence of poverty due to the pandemic has just increased. So one factor which comes into this aspect of studying the multidimensional poverty index of this year is that the majority data has been pre-pandemic, and that is why we need to take this into consideration. But nonetheless, it does show a trend which we can take notice of. So which is the state which has performed the best over here? In terms of Bihar, which stood as the poorest state when 2005-2006 time period was concerned, where the incidence of poverty was as high as 77.4%. This has reduced to 34.7% in the 2019-21 time period. And India has by far the largest number of poor people worldwide at around 22.8 crore, followed by Nigeria at 9.6 crores. So India still has the largest number of poor people in the whole wide world. This is also because of the large population that India has, and 2/3 of these people live in a household in which at least one person is deprived in nutrition. So poverty, malnutrition always go hand in hand. And when we talk about this, is a very drastic figure, because when we talk about the poor children in our country, so there are around 9.7 crore poor children in India, which were measured in 2019-2021. This is such high a number that it is even more than all the poor people, children as well as adults combined from all other countries. India still has a larger number of only poor children. So this shows the dismal situation the children, the young poor children of India which they are in, and therefore this calls for a serious cause of concern and intervention to make their situation better. So that is why whenever we measure the data, the measuring of the data is the starting point for a holistic and effective policy to be made in this regard. So this is the condition with respect to the multidimensional poverty index for India. Now, in tune with the index that is taken out by the UNDP, even the Niti Aayog takes out the national multidimensional poverty index. This is done on a national level, and they measure the poverty level of various states. So let's take a look at which are the most poor states and which are the states which are doing the best. So the poorest state even in the Niti Aayog's multidimensional poverty index is Bihar, where the poverty extent was as high as 51.9%, and the best performing state is Kerala, which has the least poverty, which is around 0.7%. So this is the snapshot with respect to the multidimensional poverty index for the global level as well as for the national level. And with this, let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, PM Modi inaugurates One Nation, One Fertilizer scheme. Now, this article appears, as we can see, from the inauguration of the new scheme which the PM has done, and this is known as the One Nation, One Fertilizer scheme. So now this scheme has been announced basically, and the PM has inaugurated 600 Kisan Samriddhi Kendras, and the scheme is announced, and he has said that these steps were being taken to modernize agriculture. So what are being done is that certain centers who would help the farmers, which are known as Kisan Samriddhi Kendras, they would function as helping centers for the farmers. So what exactly is this scheme, the One Nation, One Fertilizer scheme? And through this scheme, through this article, we'll try to understand the background of the fertilizer sector or fertilizer industry in India, as to why exactly is the fertilizer sector important for India, how is it performing, what is the government's role in it. We'll try to take a look at all of that. So when we talk about the fertilizer sector in India, it is a very, very significant sector, and the evidence of that can be taken that it is one of the components in the index of 8 core industries. Most of us would have heard about the index of 8 core industries. This is the index which comes every month, which actually measures the performance of the most critical industries which are performing in the Indian economy. And out of those 8 sectors, one sector is the fertilizer industry. So this gives us an example or evidence as to why this industry is important. And second of all, this fertilizer is basically the backbone of Indian agriculture, because to understand why fertilizer is important, let's understand what is a fertilizer first of all. So a fertilizer is nothing but any organic or inorganic substance, either natural or artificial, which supplies one or more of the chemical elements or nutrients required for plant growth. So they provide 6 macronutrients and 8 micronutrients to the plants for their well-balanced growth. So fertilizer is nothing but a supplement that we give to the soil so that the macronutrients in the soil increase, and the yield which the farmers want from the soil of their crops, that also increases. So that is the concept of fertilizer. And why is it prominent in India is because the soils of India, the 5-6 types of soils which we have all over India, it is seen that they generally lack the main macronutrients which are required for high yields in agriculture, which is generally nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These three nutrients are said to be the most prominent nutrients which are required for the plant growth. And Indian soils generally lack these nutrients, and that is why to supply the soils with fertilizer is very, very important. So there are various types of macronutrients which are required. Like I said, the major ones are nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Other are calcium, magnesium, sulfur. And the secondary micronutrients are boron, chlorine, copper, iron, zinc, and other such micronutrients. So based on this, the fertilizers in India and around the world are divided into three major types based on their parent element. So first is the nitrogenous fertilizers, which of course will have nitrogen as their primary component. So the examples of nitrogenous fertilizers are urea, ammonium nitrate, ammonium sulfate. There is a fertilizer which is called diammonium phosphate. So that is a popular fertilizer in this arena. Second is the potassic fertilizer. X-potassium nitrate, chili saltpeter are all the examples of fertilizers which have potassium as their primary element. And third is the phosphatic fertilizers which have phosphate as their primary element. So X superphosphate or triple phosphate are the examples of phosphatic fertilizers. So these are the types of fertilizers based on the primary element that is present in them. And these fertilizers are also the major fertilizers which are used in the Indian agriculture sector. So this was the information with respect to what is a fertilizer and what are the various types. Now, when we talk about India, which is that fertilizer which is used the most in India? So urea or the nitrogen based fertilizer dominates Indian sector, and it is the most produced. 86% of production is done for urea fertilizer, the most consumed 74%, and the most imported as well. So this is another dependence that India has, that when it has such high need for fertilizers and it is producing on national level as well, but still India has to import a lot of fertilizers. And to reduce this import bill on India wants to reform the fertilizer sector. Here it is important to note that it was this fertilizer crisis that has led Sri Lanka to the downfall as we see today. It was because that Sri Lanka, in order to grow their crops, had to import a lot of fertilizer, which again put stress on their forex reserves, and therefore they had to lose their forex reserves to buy more fertilizers, which is what led to them announcing their organic farming policy, which is what led to the disaster which we know. So fertilizer became a very important component for Sri Lanka's crisis, and that is why reforming the fertilizer sector for India also is a priority. So urea dominates, and the fertilizer industry has the capacity to indigenously meet 50% of the country's phosphatic fertilizers. But India still depends heavily on imports for the raw ingredients for its phosphatic and potassium fertilizers. So this was the information with respect to what are the different types of fertilizers and what kind of fertilizers are prevalent in India. Now let's come to the point where how does the government come into this? So for that, let's understand who can regulate on the fertilizer sector. So according to the constitution, the fertilizer is mentioned in two places, one in the union list as entry 52 and another in the concurrent list as entry 33. So this tells us that all the laws on fertilizers can be made by the central government since it is placed in the union list, and can be also made by the state government and central government parallelly since it is placed in the concurrent list. So this shows that both state and center have a jurisdiction to make policy or law on this fertilizer sector. So that is why, given the need and given all the picture that the fertilizer sector carries in India, what happens is that government has to majorly regulate this sector, where the prices of the fertilizers, what price the fertilizer will be, what would be the quantity and quality, all of it is regulated by the central government or the state government, which tells us that this is done because, as we just established, the high need for fertilizers, all the farmers need it and they don't necessarily have the high amounts of money to pay for them. So what the government does is, here is where the fertilizer subsidy comes in, wherein it has also established fertilizer manufacturing plants, and some are private players also who manufacture it. And when they're procuring fertilizers from it, they ask them to supply these fertilizers to the farmers at subsidized rates, and that rate which is being lessened, and the differential price for the subsidized rate is given as a subsidy to these fertilizer manufacturers. This is where the government intervenes, and it not just regulates the quantity and quality, but it also regulates the price of the fertilizers. All of this is done just to benefit the farmers of India. So this is where the one nation, one fertilizer scheme comes in, wherein the government feels that if they're regulating this sector majorly, they want to change this sector in the form of regulating the packaging of the fertilizers. So let's understand what this one nation, one fertilizer scheme is saying. So to bring about uniformity in the fertilizer brands across the country, the government issued an order directing all companies to sell their products under a single brand name that would be of Bharat. So what this scheme is essentially doing is that it wants to change the packaging structure of the fertilizer bags, wherein no brand, either private or government, would be mentioned on the fertilizer bag, and only one brand name would be mentioned, that would be Bharat. So all these bags, whether containing urea or diammonium phosphate or muriate of potash or NPK, these are all types of fertilizers, will sport the brand name Bharat Urea, Bharat DAP, Bharat MOP and Bharat NPK, irrespective of the company that is manufacturing it. So this is the main aim of the scheme. So a single brand name is being done, and a logo of the Pradhan Mantri Bharatiya Januvarak Pariyojana, this is the name for the fertilizer scheme, will have to be displayed on the bag. And the central government grants subsidies annually to the fertilizer company under the Pradhan Mantri Bharat Januvarak Yojana. So what this means is that since the government majorly regulates this sector and it decides the price, that is why it wants to advertise its brand on the fertilizer bags and does not want to give much space to the private or government manufacturers. So it would have a single logo, and 2/3 of the packaging space would be provided to the government, and 1/3 of the packaging space would be provided to either the private manufacturer or the government manufacturer. This is being done. Why is the government wanting to do this? It feels that since the government is regulating the price of the urea, it feels that since it is granting subsidy, it feels that it has the right to take credit for it. That is why the government is wanting to take such step. But what can be the drawbacks of doing this? When this happens, that the government is taking away the packaging space of the fertilizer bags, will this not disincentivize the private manufacturers or the manufacturers of urea where they're not getting enough space? So it can disincentivize the fertilizer companies from undertaking marketing and brand promotion activities. And secondly, in case of any bag or batch of fertilizers not meeting the required standards, earlier if the packaging was to be of the private manufacturer, the blame would be put on that company. But now that may be passed on fully to the government. So these are some of the aspects which come in when we talk about the One Nation, One Fertilizer scheme, where if the government undertakes to brand itself on the fertilizer bags, what can be the repercussions on it. But having discussed this scheme, what becomes important is that it is not just important to decide on the packaging of the fertilizers, but it is also very important to simultaneously talk and discuss and also then intervene on the important aspects of the fertilizer sector, where there are certain other pressing issues which are ailing this sector, which need urgent attention. So this was a discussion on this article, and with this let's move on to our next article for the day. The next article which appears reads, how does the tokenization prevent online card fraud? Now this particular question occurs in the newspaper because a new scheme or a tool of tokenization has been introduced by the Reserve Bank of India, and we have seen in the prelims examination that new interventions and innovation, especially related to the banking sector, are often asked by the UPSC. So that is why we'll we'll try to understand what exactly is tokenization and how is it going to benefit the Indian banking system. So what is tokenization? Tokenization, as the RBI defines it, refers to the replacement of actual credit and debit card details with an alternate code called the token, which will be unique for a combination of card, token request and device. Basically, what RBI is wanting to do is to take the safety of the credit and debit cards of its customers and the citizens of the country, take the safety to one level higher, which means that whenever we carry our credit or debit card, there are chances of either people stealing it or people copying the details of it. So what it wants to introduce is a token or a certain object which would work in the place of the card. Now what this will do is that this will add an added layer of the security, and one might not have to flash his credit or debit card every time, and only using the token will suffice for it. So how is this working? Because this as I said, this is being done to benefit the customer and give an added layer of security to this. So when it comes to where this will work, currently this is only working for the online transactions, and in the physical transactions still one might have to use their card and swipe it at the point of sale machines. So this particular innovation has been done on the online sector currently only, where we can indulge into online banking, and the cards are generally saved for every apps. So this is the tokenization facility which is being introduced, and as of now about 19.5 crore tokens have been created, and this creating token system is going to be an optional facility. So this was the important terminology that we should understand from the examination perspective, and we finish our article over here, and with this we finish the discussion, and we'll meet again tomorrow with the important articles of the day. Thank you.